All right, so I think we're good to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam, and I'm a member of the success team here at BigTime. And today's webinar will be on the invoicing functionality that's available in BigTime. We do have these webinars every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central Time with alternating topics each week. The other topics that we cover are project management, reporting, and the features that are available in the Premier version of BigTime IQ. However, this session will focus strictly on invoicing. We do have another member of our success team, Brandon, on the call as well, and he'll be available to answer your questions. So you should see the Citrix or GoToWebinar sidebar that has a question box, and you can send your questions in real time, and Brandon will be fielding and answering those on this call. If for some reason we don't get to your question on the call, you can feel free to send that into support@bigtime.net or contact us via live chat. We do have support agents standing by. So to begin, we'll take a look at an overview of invoicing in BigTime. So I'll click into my site here and go to the Invoicing Overview screen. So just to walk through some of the basics of this screen, from here, you have your work in progress, which is all unbilled time and expenses. You've got your draft invoices, which are invoices that are still in process, so they haven't been posted to QuickBooks, sent to the customer, paid, or marked as disputed, which is just a manual status that you can mark an invoice if it is being disputed by your customer. If we swap this to finals, this would be all of your invoices that have been sent to the customer, posted to QuickBooks, or paid for the current month. And lastly, here you've got the AR aging, which is your total open balance. And it lets you know how many invoices you have that are open as well. Below, you've got your monthly invoicing summary. So if you hover over any one of these months, you can see how much you invoiced that month and how much of that has actually been paid. And then if you click into that bar graph, it'll open up the finals for that month, and you can see all of those invoices from, in this case, June of 2019. Up top here, you can click Create Invoice to start the invoicing process. You can click Update Rates, which would update the billing rates for all of the time in the work in progress. So if any of the billing rates have changed, the new rates would be applied to all time that's in the WIP. You can also log a payment as well to an invoice. You also have the ability to log a prepayment too. So if you received a prepayment for a customer, you could log that here, and you can see up top here for AWC Consulting, they actually have a credit of $5,000 because they made a prepayment. So the way you would enter a prepayment is just as you would a standard payment, and the system would basically let you know that this customer doesn't have any outstanding invoices, so this amount will be logged as a credit, which is what this message here is displaying. And now for future invoices, we can use that $500 prepayment to put towards those invoices. So it used to be the case that with payments, you kind of had to choose whether you're managing those in BigTime or in QuickBooks, because after you posted an invoice to QuickBooks, you can no longer log payments to it in BigTime. That has actually changed as of a recent update last month. So for our customers who have been setting up the workflow, managing payments in one system or the other, that you can now actually post an invoice to QuickBooks and then still post a payment to it from BigTime afterwards. So that's just something to be aware of. It's a newer development. From the invoicing configure page up top, this is where we can enter all of our company's address information, the logo as well if we want that displayed on our invoices. In the default section, we can toggle the tax rate options. So we have the single invoice rate, and then for Canadian, UK, and Australian customers, we have the line item tax rates, where you can choose a different tax rate per line item. you can set up an invoice auto number setting. So you have the same options for the format here that you have for your project ID formats. So if you wanted your invoice numbers to automatically generate as being the year dash your client ID dash sequential digits, you can set that up, for example. Or if you just want sequential digits, like I do here, you can set up the format using capital P's as in Paul, and that just stands for 3 sequential digits. So 282, 283, 284, that's how my invoices will auto number. You have the option to enforce unique invoice numbers, which would not allow you to have 2 invoices with the same number. So if that's turned off, you can have 2 invoices with the same number. Definitely recommend having that turned on. Lock billing rates would come into play if you're looking to update the billing rates for the time that's in your work in progress, but only after a specific date. So for me, I have all time locked on and before June 30th of 2019, meaning if I went to click update rates, only time after this date would be affected. Below that, you can customize which invoice statuses will appear in your drafts. This is really just personal preference. The statuses that I have selected here are the default statuses that should appear in your draft section, but we did have some customers who wanted their post invoices, for example, to show up in drafts. So we gave that option to customize those statuses. Calculators, you can see I have quite a bit here. These are the different types of invoices that you can actually create in your site. If you are a pro customer, you won't have nearly as many calculators as I have here. The reason I have so many is because I have a IQ Premier site and I have the ability to create custom invoice calculators, which give me the ability to create an invoice, for example, that's a T&M invoice with a 4% admin fee markup. As of right now, if you are a pro customer, or a premier customer, we do offer the creation of these custom calculators at a fee. So if that's something that you're possibly interested in, if you have a unique scenario that's not covered by our pre-built invoice calculators, that's something that we can always discuss. But besides that, you do have some of the pre-built calculators like the manual invoice, which is just a straight fixed amount that you're billing the customer and ignoring your WIP, time and expenses basically. You've got the T&M invoice, which is based on your billing rates that you have set up for your time and any expenses. Your fixed fee, which is based on your tasks that you've set up within your projects. Maybe they're not called tasks in your site. They could also be called engagements or phases or matters. And that's just a difference in the verbiage of your site. And then you can see some of these custom calculators like the T&M plus deposit, which every customer actually has that custom calculator available. You can import that into your site. And then some of the other custom ones that I created myself. PDF styles, these are the actual custom PDF templates that you're sending to your customers. So as you can see, in my example firm, I bill out some customers based on time and materials, some based on a fixed fee. So for those different types of customers, I have different types of invoice templates. For my fixed fee templates, I show my budget status. We'll take a look at how those actually look in just a bit. For my T&M customers, I don't show any budget related information because I don't have budgets for those customers. I just show the time detail. So I have different templates for those different invoicing scenarios. Lastly, here you've got your email settings. So the default settings would be to send from BigTime, and then the send from email would typically be do not reply at iq.bigtime.net. So this is where you can go in and customize where you want your invoices to come from, basically, when they're in your client's inbox, if it displays your company's name, or if you want it to display your name or your bookkeeper's name and their email address, you can specify that here. So when I send customers emails out of my BigTime site, in their inbox, it'll show my name and my personal BigTime email. And then below, I can customize the subject line of those invoice emails as well as the body of the message. Some of these fields are coded to automatically pull invoice numbers, and the amounts. So those coded fields I would warn against changing, but any of the other verbiage, feel free to change to your liking. All right, so let's start with, as far as invoice creation goes, let's start with creating a T&M invoice, which is probably the most common type of invoice that customers will create. To do that, we can start from either creating or hitting create invoice up on the top left or clicking into the work in progress. So if we click into the WIP, we can see all of the time and expenses. We can then click into the fee amount and see each of those individual time entries. We can also edit the entries from here and edit the bill rates. Back in the WIP, we can use advanced filters up in the top right to filter by date. So if we wanted to see just WIP from, let's say, September through November, you can also filter by client type, invoice type, which would be based on the last type of invoice that you created for the client, by team lead on the client, and you can also choose to show only time and expenses that have been approved. So if you do have a time and expense review and approval process, I usually recommend having those boxes checked. That would ensure that you never bill for any time that hasn't been approved. So I have this filter on now, so we're only looking at WIP from September through November. Let's say for our purposes, we just want to bill for all the time for this particular client. We can check this box on the left and then hit bulk create invoices. Here we can choose which type of invoice we want to create. So for our purposes, we'll just choose time and materials, which is probably the most common type of invoice. Then we'll click next. From here, what we're seeing on the right is being determined based on this summary / subtotal settings. So right now we're subtotaling by task. So we're looking at the total dollar amount of billable time logged to each of these tasks. So discovery, consulting, and design development are all tasks that are set up within this 10.3 Premier Features webinar project. If I wanted to instead subtotal by staff, I could do that, or maybe by team role. Looks like there is no team role for this project, so that description is just blank. By department, maybe. For our purposes, I will subtotal by task, and it's important to note that if you are looking to track what you're invoicing against predefined task budgets that you're setting up, then you do have to subtotal by task or task and rate. Otherwise, once you create this invoice, the amounts that you're invoicing for won't correlate with each of those task budgets. So just something to be aware of. Up top here, you can change which billing rate is being used by default. You can change the invoice date range, and that's just carrying over from the WIP filter that we used. You can add an invoice note, which would show up beneath the amount due. You can once again choose to include only approved time and expenses. And if you already had those options selected in the WIP, then that would carry over here as well. And then lastly, you can choose to show your task notes as the line item notes. You can also click into the line item name and add an additional description. You can change the amount from here as well, and then you can add additional lines. Once you're ready to create a draft invoice, you can hit finalize in the bottom right. And now we've got our draft invoice. So from here, you can rearrange the order of the line items on the invoice by clicking and dragging those dots on the left-hand side. You can click into any of these fields, the item description, task, QuickBooks item, and amount. This view that's being shown right now is actually not the default view. So the default view would be the quantity, rate, and amount. So normally when you create an invoice, this is what you'll see. but you do have the ability to toggle between that view showing just the description and not the quantity and rate, or to actually show where each of these line items will hit your chart of accounts if you're posting this invoice to QuickBooks, and that would be the QB item. In this scenario, I have each of these line items correlating to a task, and I can then specify where each of those line items should hit as far as QuickBooks is concerned. Up in the top right, I've got my invoice number, and that's just an auto number, but I can click into that and manually change it, and it is alphanumeric, so you can have letters in there as well. You have the option to pick up unbilled time and expenses. So if more time has been logged to this project that I wanted to just pull onto this invoice, after I create it, I can click pick up unbilled time and expenses, and then say pick up all of the time logged from the state range and pull it onto this invoice. Below that, you can enter a PO number, and just a general tip here, usually with any other custom field, you cannot pull those onto an invoice with the exception of the PO number custom field. So what I mean by that is if we open up our client list and you can see here I added a PO number custom field, so it's not a default field that you'll have in your site, but you can add that by clicking add/edit custom fields and then label it as PO number. Whatever you enter in that custom field will actually pull onto the invoice in this PO number field area. So it is a custom field, but that is the one and only custom field that you actually can pull onto live invoices. Then you have your terms, and if you are connected to QuickBooks, your QuickBooks invoice terms will sync over. If you click and edit these values, you can set a default set of terms. So net 15 or net 30 is pretty common for that. On the right, that's where you can check this box that says use this term as the default on my invoices. Below that, you've got your status, and this will update automatically as the invoice moves throughout the invoicing workflow. So if the invoice has been sent to review, if it's been approved, rejected, posted to QuickBooks, or sent to the customer, those will all update automatically, as well as once the invoice has been paid. The only status here that wouldn't be automatically updated is disputed, and that's just a manual status. If the invoice is being disputed by the customer, you can go in here and change the status yourself. Then you have the draft date, which is just the date that you finalized the invoice, although you can change that. You've got the sent date, which if you're sending invoices out of BigTime directly, that will automatically update once you do email the invoice to the customer. And the due date, which is based on your terms. So for us, the terms are set to net 30, so they're 30 days out from our draft date. Once we actually send the invoice, the due date would reflect to be 30 days out from the sent date. Back on the left-hand side of the screen, if we wanted to add an additional line item to this invoice, we can do that here. So if we wanted to add a service charge, for example, or admin fee, we can add that. Or in some rare cases, if you wanted to add a discount, you can actually just add a negative line item, and then BigTime will do the math for you. Up top, you can edit the billing contact on this client. So for this example, we don't have a billing contact set up yet. If we wanted to, we can click edit address/contact information and set them up here rather than having to navigate back to the client list in a new tab. And this contact would be saved on the client for future invoices. As far as contact role goes, you can have one primary contact, one billing, and as many others as you'd like. The billing would be the default on this client, however, so the person that you would normally send invoices to and whose name and email address you might want displaying on the actual invoice PDF. If the billing contact for this client or for this project, let's say, is the same as the billing contact for another project underneath this same client, you have the copy function. And then you can copy over a different billing contact on another project that's under the same client. In the time tab, these are all the time entries that were pulled from the WIP onto this invoice. If we wanted to make any changes, such as write-ups or write-downs, we can edit the total fees from here. And those adjustments would be tracked in the system, so we could create reports and see the adjusted amount. If you do make any changes to the time, you can include a revision note as well, so you can run a report in the future and you'll have that for your audit purposes to see exactly what you changed looking back. If you wanted to drop some time off of the invoice and back into the work in progress, you can check the box next to the entry or entries that you'd want to drop, and then hit bulk actions and drop. If you want the total dollar amount of the invoice to reflect that you actually dropped those entries, you then have to hit recalculate invoice amount as well. If you check the box and hit bulk actions, you'll also see a delete option. That would delete the time from your site entirely, not just from the invoice. So just something to be aware of. Drop will put the time back in your work in progress and you can invoice it later. Delete will completely delete the time entry. Update would be to make bulk changes to time. So if you wanted to bulk update the category or the staffer or task, for example, you could do that using the bulk update. Update rates. This works similarly to the update rates button that we looked at earlier. However, the difference is clicking this update rates button only affects the time on this invoice. The update rates button from the invoicing overview page will update all billing rates for all time that's in the work in progress. And then add time would just be to add a brand new time entry. The expense tab is along the same lines. This is where if there are any expenses on this invoice, you'd be able to view them, edit them, write them up or down, drop them back into the WIP, or delete them. If we jump over to the preview tab, this is where you can take a look at your invoice PDF styles. So you can see here I have a custom PDF that I've set up that shows you the individual task line items and then breaks down all of the time entries grouped by task. There are some pre-built templates that we have as well, but this one I did create as a custom template, which we'll take a look at how to do that in just a minute. Here you have the option to download this PDF. You can take a snapshot of the PDF and it will store a copy in your site. So on the right, you can see the time-stamped PDF copy. You can attach additional documents, and at this time, we only offer support for a PDF format, but that may change in the future. You can forward the invoice to the review and approval process if you do have an invoice review process enabled. When you do that, you can also send a note to the reviewer as well. Other than that, in the top right, you have the ability to print this invoice to a PDF and choose which format you'd like to print it to. Same thing as a Word document. If there's any manual edits you'd like to make to any of the text on the invoice or maybe the alignment or text justification. If you click the cloud, you can post this invoice to your QuickBooks. Here, you can choose which customer to post this invoice over to. If your customer is properly linked, you won't have to select that. It would already be pre-selected. Same thing with your AR account. Mine was already set up, so I don't have to select that. And then below, I can choose where each line item should post over to as far as my service items. Once again, if these tasks were already linked to service items, then I wouldn't have to select where I want them to post over to now. That would already be selected for me. And where you can set those links up would be in your client or project list. If you go to the task tab, and once again, it might be phases or engagements or to-dos in your site, the verbiage can be different. And then you click into one of those task names. In the accounting tab, that's where you can link the task to a service item. So if we had done this beforehand, then once we go to post the invoice, we wouldn't have to select a service item every time. This is the default posting format for invoices. However, if you wanted to post over the actual time and expense detail to QuickBooks, you can click that red triangle next to amount on the right and then choose time and expense detail with staff. And then you can post over a line item for each actual time entry with the staffer's info and the amount of hours, billing rate, and total amount, or the time and expense detail with no staff. If you click the $sign, you can log a payment to the invoice. And then you can also email the invoice directly to the customer. Any contacts that you have set up for this customer would show up with a checkbox next to the email address in that to section. I just don't have any set up currently, so it's blank, although I can click more and actually add a new contact from here. You can also choose who to CC, blind copy. I can edit the subject line, body of the message, and if I have any attachments on this invoice, I can choose to combine the invoice with those attachments into a single PDF or to send the attachments separately. And then down below, I can email myself a preview copy if I just wanted to see how that email will look before sending it to the customer, or click email invoice to send it out. So that is a T&M invoice. To create a fixed fee invoice, we can start by clicking Create Invoice up in the top left. And once again, we're back in the Invoicing Overview page. We can then choose one of our fixed fee customers and hit Next. There we'll choose fixed fee as our type of invoice or calculator. So now the screen, before we finalize, looks a little different. On the right-hand side, we have our list of tasks that we've set up for this customer. We have the fee budgets, how much we've previously billed for those tasks, and how much we want to bill on this invoice. So for this project, currently, I have this marked as a % complete. So I can just enter a certain percentage and BigTime will calculate that based on the fee budget. Or if this is a milestone billing project, I can choose that, check the box next to pre-plan, and then just enter the dollar amount that I want to bill on the right. The percentage and fee/WIP dollar amount, those do not show by default. So to show those, you just have to click the gear icon in the top right, and then choose to show the WIP summary and the invoice percentages. The other option here would be to not update client % complete values. So by default, when you create a fixed fee invoice, let's say you build half of the fee budget for a specific task, what normally happens is that task will be marked as 50% complete. If you didn't want that % complete to automatically update, then you can check this box. So that would be more for customers who like to manually control the % complete of their tasks. On the left-hand side, you can choose the invoice date range. By default, when you create a fixed fee invoice, there will be no date range applied if you didn't select one in the WIP. So this would affect the actual time that gets picked up on this invoice and cleared and marked as billed. So if we have no date range selected, then all time logged against the pre-planned task for the Planet Express project would be pulled onto this invoice and marked as billed. At the same time, if we didn't want that to happen for whatever reason, if we didn't want the time logged to this project to be marked as billed, we can uncheck this box here on the left that says clear WIP for selected tasks. Otherwise, that will be checked by default. Normally, you would want that time to be marked as billed so it's not sitting in the WIP, appearing as it's outstanding. Create separate line items for the invoices or for the expenses I'm invoicing. That is normally checked by default as well. So if you had any expenses that were logged to this client, they would show up as a separate line item. So if you had, for example, a travel mileage expense, that would just show up and with the dollar amount of that expense. You can choose to populate the line item notes with your task notes. And then once again, same as with the T&M, you can also choose to include only approved time and only approved expenses. Once you hit finalize, the screen here for the invoice detail looks pretty similar to our T&M invoice. You can rearrange those line items, edit the amounts or the descriptions, post over to QuickBooks, print to a PDF, all the same options. Here we can take a look at our fixed fee invoice template. So as I mentioned earlier, I have different custom templates for my T&M projects versus my fixed fee. So on this template, we are showing the total budget for each task, the % that's remaining of that budget, the dollar amount that's remaining, the total that's been billed, the total that is being billed on this invoice, and then what's been billed prior. So on that note, let's take a look at how we actually created the invoice template. So under Invoicing Configure, if we go to PDF styles, let's just take a look at this BigTime fixed fee with budget status and percentages. So here you can name the template. You can then customize the invoice header. So here I'm choosing to show my logo, show it to the left of our address block. And just a general tip here, the logo will appear bigger if you choose top or bottom versus left or right, but it will appear biggest if you choose solo. That would mean, however, that you're not showing your address block on the template. You can then choose to show the client billing address and the billing contact name, as well as the overall note. The overall note would be the default invoice note if you have one set up for that client, and that's just referring back to this area here from our client list. So if you have client-specific remittance information, for example, that you would want pulled onto the invoices for this client, you can enter that information as a default invoice note and then choose to display that on the PDF. Fields will control which fields show in the top right corner of the invoice header. So referring to this area. So right now we've got the total amount due, invoice number, due date, and terms. You can customize the appearance. So if you physically print out your invoices, you can choose an envelope format. You can change the font size, and color schemes. You can see that I've chosen a custom color scheme where the highlights and lines of my invoice are red, the same color as my logo. There is also an option to match your logo where BigTime will read the colors of your logo automatically and use them on the invoice. And then lastly here, you can add a footer just on the first page beneath the amount due or on the bottom of every page. So this can come in handy if you want page numbers. One thing you can add here is $, lowercase p of $, capital P. And basically that will add page 1 of, let's say 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, if you have a multi-page invoice. Below that, you can choose which actual invoice field are pulling on your template. So include line items. This would show the line items on the invoice detail. So these line items here. For this example, we're including those line items in the budget status portion, which is why I don't have it selected on this portion here. If I also included line items here, it would basically double up and you would see those tasks and amounts twice. So if it's a fixed fee invoice, usually I would say it's unnecessary to include these line items and also the budget status portion. In the budget status portion, I have the default view, which will just show each task without the task group name. If you have tasks and subtasks, you may want to use either the flat view or hierarchy view. That way those tasks will be grouped and you'll see the subtasks underneath each task group. If you use task groups, but then you use subtasks more for internal purposes, you do have the group only option, and then those subtask names won't show on the invoice. Beneath that, you can choose which budget fields to show. So if you wanted to show the remaining budget, total, prior, or current in dollars or the percentage, you have those options as well. Below that, you can choose to hide archive tasks or all tasks that are unbilled. If you don't check those boxes, you're basically choosing to show all tasks, whether they've been billed already or not. You do also have the option to hide tasks that don't have budgets, and then to show expenses that are not logged to tasks. The receipt portion here is mainly for T&M invoice types. If there are receipts attached to expenses, you can choose to include them on the actual invoice PDF, and then you can choose to include 1, 2, 3, 4, or 6 receipts per page. In the AR tab, you can also choose to show if the client has a prior balance. You can show that on the actual invoice PDF. And you can get more granular too and show the actual unpaid invoices, so the invoice numbers and amounts. Let's take a look at the custom T&M template that I created as well. So the difference here is we have time detail showing on this template. So you can go in and choose each individual column that you want showing for time detail. So I'm showing my staffer's name for each time entry, the date it was logged, the task it's logged to, any notes they entered, how many hours, the billing rate, and total amount. I'm sorting by the staffer's name, descending, I'm excluding non-billable time, and then subtotaling by task. For further customization, if let's say you wanted to change some of the spacing on the invoice template, or there's a custom footer that you wanted to format, or basically any HTML or CSS customizations, you can always convert this template to source only. And then you have the code of the actual invoice template. We do offer these sort of customizations at a fee as well. So if you do have any kind of custom ideas for, let's say, the fields that show in the top right corner, ways that you want the line items formatted, we can definitely discuss that and see if it's possible. The last type of invoice would be an item-based billing invoice. So if we go to Invoicing Configure and take a look at calculators, this is turned off by default, so you do have to manually enable this the first time. An item-based billing invoice is where you might have a mix of T&M and fixed fee on the same invoice. So for example, if we have a client like Planet Express that has multiple tasks, let's say for pre-plan, this is a T&M task. So we can click into Edit Task, and this fee type field, this is where we can specify time and materials, and that's actually the default fee type. Then let's say for this initial meeting, that's a fixed fee. We're billing $600 flat for that task. So we can change that to be either milestone or percent complete. Retainer in this scenario refers to billing the same amount every invoice. So if I had a retainer of, let's say, $5,000 a month, I can choose retainer billing and then enter 5,000 below. Then every time I go to create an invoice, the $5,000 would pre-populate that invoice for that retainer task. Let's just call this milestone. And then now, kind of similar to how we create a fixed fee invoice, we can click Create Invoice in the top left, choose that Planet Express project, choose item-based billing, and here we'll see each task. We don't have any time logs to our T&M task, so the only task that shows is our fixed fee task. And just like with the fixed fee invoice, we can enter the actual amount that we want to bill on the right-hand side of the screen. So that about wraps up everything that I had to cover on this invoicing webinar. I want to thank everyone once again for attending. If you do have any questions on invoicing, be on the lookout for an email from Brandon that will have some helpful knowledge base articles. If you have an idea for a custom invoice calculator, or if you need any custom invoice XML formatting, you can feel free to reach out to your success rep and we can talk about that to kind of scope that out, what that would look like in terms of price. In addition, if you're looking for any one-on-one training with a success rep such as myself, feel free to reach out to your designated success rep. If you don't know who that is, you can send an email to success@bigtime.net and then we can get you situated there. In the same email that you'll receive as a follow-up with the invoicing articles, you'll see some links to review sites. So if you do have a minute or two to offer up some feedback on what you thought of the webinar, or maybe things you'd like to see on future webinars, that would be greatly appreciated. Feel free to mention my name as the success rep who conducted your webinar. And once again, that is Sam. In addition, or in return for that feedback, we will be sending some free Amazon gift cards as well as free Starbucks gift cards. Thanks again, everyone, for attending, and have a great rest of your day.